December blizzard swallowed the sky. Wind howled. Snow fell so thick a man could see no more than 2 steps ahead. In a small cabin among the pines, a 58-year-old man sat by the window. His hand gripped his walking stick. 12 years he had lived alone here. No visitors. No sound but the wind. He had prepared for everything: wood, water, food. But not for the sound that rose through the storm. Thin, broken human. He stood, pulled on his heavy coat, stepped into the white. Snow lashed his face like knives. He pushed through thigh-deep drifts toward the cry that came again, closer, weaker. Beneath an old pine, a girl curled small against the trunk. She wore a purple coat, bare hands, blue lips, eyes open, but no longer fighting. He knelt, took off his coat and wrapped it around her, lifted her. She weighed almost nothing. As if part of her had already gone, he turned back toward the cabin, carrying her into the swirling white. The mountains did not care about December. That was the first thing Elias Stone had learned when he came up here. 12 years ago, with nothing but a mule, a toolbox, and a grief so heavy it had changed the way he walked. The mountains did not care about grief either. They did not care about anything a man carried inside him. They only cared about whether he was prepared for what they were about to throw at him. December of 1880 was throwing everything. The storm had been building for 3 days. Elias had watched it come in from the west, the way a man watches a fire spread across dry grass. Slow at first, then all at once. The sky had turned the color of a bruise on the second day. By the third morning, there was no sky at all. Just white, just wind, just the sound of something enormous and indifferent grinding the world down to nothing. He had prepared. He always prepared. Extra firewood stacked tight against the north wall of the cabin. Enough to last 2 weeks if the storm decided to stay. Dried venison hung from the ceiling of the root cellar. 2 barrels of clean water from the creek, drawn and stored before the freeze locked everything solid. Lantern oil, candles. A spare axe handle, in case the old one cracked in the cold. Elias Stone did not leave things to chance. That was not stubbornness. It was arithmetic. A man alone in the Rockies at 58 years old had exactly 1 margin for error, none. Every decision he made either kept him alive or it didn't. There was no one to come help him if he was wrong. No neighbor within 10 miles. No doctor within 40. Just the mountains, and the cold, and the particular silence of a man who had stopped expecting company. He had been a carpenter once, in Boulder. Back when he had a wife who laughed too loud at her own jokes and a future that felt as solid as the houses he built. Ruth had been the kind of woman who filled a room without trying, not because she was loud, because she was present. Because when Ruth Stone was in a room, the air in that room was different. Warmer. More awake, like the room itself remembered it was supposed to be inhabited. She had wanted children desperately. They had tried and tried. And when the pregnancy finally held at last, Elias had spent 3 weeks walking around Boulder with a grin he couldn't get rid of, even when he was trying to be serious. He had started building a cradle. Cherry wood, hand-carved rails. He had been meticulous about it. Of course he had. He never finished it. Ruth had started showing symptoms in the spring of 1868. A headache that wouldn't leave. Fatigue that pressed her into the bed, like a weight she couldn't lift. Then the vomiting. Then the yellow tinge at the edges of her eyes that the doctor called jaundice, but couldn't explain. She was 34 years old and healthy as anyone he'd ever known. And then she wasn't. 3 weeks. That was how long it took. 3 weeks from the first headache to the last breath. The doctor said it was some kind of fever. Said it happened sometimes. Said there was nothing anyone could have done. Elias had believed him. For 12 years he had believed him. He had sold everything after. The house. The tools. The business he'd spent 8 years building. He had walked away from Boulder on a September morning. And he had not gone back. The mountains had taken him taken broken things. Quietly, without commentary, without pity. and without asking why you arrived or what you had left behind or whether you intended to stay, he had built the cabin himself. Of course he had. A man who had spent 20 years working wood does not stop knowing how to work wood just because his heart has gone out of it. The cabin was small but solid, 2 rooms, a sleeping room and a main room with the hearth, a covered porch, a root cellar dug into the hillside behind, a small outbuilding for the mule, and, later, for the 4 chickens he had acquired from a passing trapper 3 years back. He had named the chickens. Not because he was sentimental, because it was easier to track which one was laying and which one was not if they had names. That was what he told himself. The brown one was Hazel. The spotted one was Dot. The fat white one was called Duchess because she walked like she owned the place. And the 4th one, small, mean, always the last to the feed, he called Spite. Spite had not laid a single egg in 4 months. He kept her anyway. The storm hit its full fury on Wednesday. Elias spent the morning inside. He sharpened his knives. He relaced one of his snowshoes where the rawhide had begun to fray. He ate a breakfast of salt pork and cornbread and drank 3 cups of coffee, which was 1 more than he usually allowed himself, because the cold made the wanting worse. By noon, the wind was loud enough that he had to raise his voice to talk to himself. He did that sometimes. Talk to himself. Not constantly. Not in the way that would concern a man who was watching. Just occasionally. A running commentary on whatever task was in front of him. Left-hand seam first. Winds coming from the northwest. That log's too green, set it aside. Ruth had found it charming early on. She had told him once that she knew she was in love with him when she overheard him arguing with a stubborn cabinet hinge in her father's kitchen, quietly but firmly, as if the hinge might eventually be persuaded. He had stopped arguing with hinges when she died. He had stopped a lot of things. By mid-afternoon he was restless in the way that only came when the weather was bad and his body knew he should be out doing something. But his common sense was winning the argument. He checked his property line once a week, every week, storm or no storm. It was a habit from his carpentry days. Check every measurement twice, verify every boundary. Make sure the foundation is level before you build anything on top of it. The eastern boundary was 1.5 miles out. The old service road, overgrown now. Nobody used it. Nobody had come down that road in all the years he'd been here. He told himself he was being foolish. The storm was bad. The drifts were knee-deep already, thigh-deep in the low places. The wind was the kind that got inside your collar and stayed there. No reasonable man went out in this. Elias was not always a reasonable man. He put on his heaviest coat, wool, double-lined, with a collar he could pull up around his ears. He wound a scarf around his neck twice, pulled his hat down hard, laced his boots all the way to the top, took his walking stick, not because he needed it for balance, but because it was useful for a testing ground you couldn't see under the snow. He told the chickens he'd be back. Spite didn't even look up. The eastern boundary was worse than he'd expected. The trail was gone entirely. He was navigating by memory and by the positions of certain trees he'd marked in his mind over the years. A twin-trunked pine at the half-mile point. A boulder shaped like a sleeping bear at 3/4. A place where the ground dipped suddenly and treacherously, which had nearly broken his ankle twice in 12 years, and which he now treated with the kind of wary respect you give to an old enemy. He moved slowly, carefully. The wind came in gusts that were almost solid, white walls of snow that made him turn his face away and wait until they passed. He was almost to the boundary, almost done, almost ready to turn around and go home and pour himself some whiskey and feel righteous about having done the thing he'd said he was going to do. That was when he heard it. At first he thought it was the wind. The storm made strange sounds. It was always making strange sounds. Branches groaning, snow dropping from high places with a sudden heavy whoomp. The wind itself, which could sound, in certain moments and certain moods, almost like a voice, he had learned to ignore it. In 12 years, he had learned to sort the sounds of the mountain into two categories: the sounds that meant something, and the sounds that did not. The trick was not to let the ones that did not mean anything spook you into reacting, and the other trick was not to let that habit make you slow when the ones that did mean something finally arrived. This one was different. High, thin, coming and going as the wind took it. Not an animal sound, or rather, exactly like an animal sound, which was the problem. Because there was one kind of animal that made a sound like that, and it was the kind you could not afford to ignore. Human Elias stopped walking. He turned slowly, the way you turn when you are trying not to scare something, trying to triangulate. The wind swallowed the sound, spat it back. There, to the left, off the trail, deeper into the trees where the pines grew so close together they made their own kind of dark. Every sensible part of him said stop, said think, said you don't know what that is and you are 58 years old and you are alone, and the nearest help is 40 miles east, and the storm is getting worse. Every sensible part of him was outvoted. He pushed through the drifts. Each step was a negotiation with the snow. How much to lift, how hard to push, how to keep moving without losing his footing on ground he couldn't see. The cry came again. Weaker, more fractured. He moved faster than was smart. The thickened. Their branches met overhead and turned the afternoon into something like twilight. The snow here was shallower. The canopy had caught some of it, but the cold was denser somehow, more concentrated, as if the trees were holding it in. And then he saw her. He almost didn't. That was the thing that stayed with him afterward. How close he came to not seeing her at all. She had curled herself against the base of one of the big old pines, a massive tree, probably older than the century, and drawn her knees to her chest and made herself as small as she possibly could. If she hadn't been wearing that coat, purple, ridiculous in the wilderness, the kind of color that had no business being this far from a town, he might have walked right past her. He didn't. He stopped, stared. A girl, not a small child, a girl on the edge of young womanhood, 16, maybe a little older. Hard to tell with the frost on her face and the way her body had gone slack against the tree. She was still conscious, barely. Her eyes were open, but the openness of them was frightening, empty. The eyes of someone who has stopped fighting. She was wearing a thin coat over what looked like a traveling dress. Boots that might have been adequate in Denver. A scarf wrapped around her neck, but loose, not doing much work. Her hands were bare. Elias moved before he finished thinking. He shrugged off his heavy outer coat in one motion and wrapped it around her shoulders. She was too far gone to react much, just a faint tightening, a flinch at the warmth or the contact. He couldn't tell which. He checked her pulse. It was there, weak and thready, like a creek in a dry summer. But there, her lips were the color of slate, her fingertips were white. He had seen this before, on a cattle drive 30 years ago. A young hand who had gotten turned around in a night storm. They had found him the next morning. They had not been in time. He was going to be in time. I've got you. His voice came out rough. He hadn't spoken at that volume in days, maybe weeks. It startled him a little. I've got you. I'm going to pick you up. Don't fight me. She didn't fight him. She didn't do anything at all except make one small sound, not a word, not quite, when he lifted her. She weighed almost nothing. That was what frightened him most, not the blue lips or the white fingers. The way she weighed almost nothing, like something was already leaving her. He turned for the cabin and walked as fast as he dared. 25 minutes, he counted them. Counted every step inside those minutes. Kept his attention on the ground in front of him, on the path he knew, on not falling, on keeping her steady. She made small sounds against his chest. Not speech, not coherent, but sounds that meant she was still here. He held on to those sounds, the way you hold on to a rope in a river. The cabin appeared through the trees the way it always appeared, without announcement, without drama, just there. Solid, his. He kicked the door open. Snow blew in behind him. He did not care. He carried her straight to the hearth. The fire had burned down to coals in his absence. He set her on the thick bare rug in front of the fireplace, and then moved with the concentrated speed of a man who knows exactly what to do and is doing it. Kindling from the box, dry wood on top. He didn't wait for the kindling to catch properly. Added more, rebuilt it fast. Got the flames going big before he turned back to her. She had not moved. He assessed her the way he would assess a problem, systematically. Her coat, the thin purple one, was soaked through, stiff in places where it had started to freeze. Her boots were worse. He pulled them off, and the socks came with them, and her feet were an alarming white. Not the white of cold skin, but the white of skin that has given up trying to be warm. He knew what to do. He had read it once, years ago, in a medical pamphlet a traveling doctor had left at the general store. Warming too fast could kill. The blood rushing back to the extremities could cause the heart to fail. Slow and steady, start at the core. He went to the bedroom and stripped the blankets from his bed. All of them. Came back and wrapped her carefully. Not in front of the fire, not close enough to burn, but close enough to feel the heat. He propped her feet on a low stool to keep them elevated. Found his 2 tin water bottles. Filled them from the bucket near the stove. Heated the water until it was warm but not hot. Wrapped each in a cloth, tucked one against her ribs, and one near her feet. Then he stood and looked at her. She looked young in the firelight, impossibly young. Dark hair matted to her face. A smear of something, mud, maybe blood, on her left cheek. Her mouth was slightly open. Her breathing was shallow, but it was there. He went and hung a pot of broth over the fire. And then he checked her coat pockets. He did it carefully, not rummaging. He was looking for identification. For some sign of who she was and where she had come from, and whether there was someone nearby who was looking for her. He found 3 things: a handful of crackers wrapped in a cloth napkin, a small brass button, the kind that came off a man's cavalry coat, and a folded piece of paper in the inside pocket, folded 3 times, written on quickly, in pencil, in handwriting, that had started careful and gotten desperate by the end. He unfolded it. My name is Eleanor Whitfield. My daughter's name is Ada. She is 16 years old, and she is a good girl, and she is very brave even though she does not always let people see it. Please take care of her. I cannot anymore. The men who are following us will find me soon, and I am leading them away from her. If you are reading this, then someone found her and she is alive, and I am thanking God for you, even though I don't know your name. Do not take her to the sheriff in Coldwater Ridge. Do not trust anyone who works for Vane. Her name is Ada. She will not cry in front of you. Do not mistake that for not needing help. And please, there is a key in the bag she is carrying. Keep it safe. It is the only thing that matters now. Elias read it twice. Then he read it a 3rd time. He folded it back exactly as it had been, and held it in his hand and looked at the fire for a while. Eleanor Whitfield. Ada. Vane, he didn't know those names. He had spent 12 years not knowing names. That had been the point. He looked at the girl on his rug. At the rise and fall of her breathing. At the way her hands had relaxed now that the cold was loosening its grip, fingers uncurling slowly like a flower that had been clenched against the frost. He had not asked for this. He was clear on that. He had not asked for any of this. But she was here, and she was alive. And someone somewhere was running through a blizzard to keep her that way. He got up and found the bag. It was a small leather satchel. The kind a woman might carry on a train journey. Inside were a few items of clothing for a girl, a dress, a wool shawl, 2 pairs of stockings. A small Bible with a name written on the inside cover in ink so old it had gone brown. Ada Ruth Whitfield, born 1864-16. He'd been right at the very bottom of the satchel, wrapped in a piece of oilcloth and then again in a kerchief. The key. It was heavier than it looked. Brass. Old but well kept, the way something is kept when it matters. He turned it over in his hands. There were markings on both sides. On one side, Whitfield, Sherman claim 1847. On the other side, smaller, almost like an afterthought. A maker's mark, a symbol, a small chevron with a crosshatch at the base. Elias sat very still for a long time. He knew that mark, not because he had seen it on a key before. He had seen it on wood. On the corner of every piece of furniture he and Ruth had owned together. A small marking, cut into the underside or the back in a place guests would never see. His mark. The mark he had used to sign his work the way a painter signs a canvas. He had taught it to Ruth. She had started using it too, toward the end, to mark things that mattered. Things she wanted remembered. He had never told anyone else. He had never shown it to anyone else. It was a private thing, between two people, the kind of private thing that only exists between two people and disappears when one of them does. How was it on this key? He turned it over again, looked at it from every angle. The chevron was slightly different, the angle of the crosshatch not quite the same as his, but close. Close enough to make his hands uncertain. He set the key down on the table very carefully, the way you set down something that might break. The broth was ready. The girl stirred when he brought the mug close. Not fully awake, not reaching for it, but her nose moved and something shifted in her face. Some animal part of her recognizing warmth and smell and the possibility of survival. Small sips. He kept his voice low and even. Easy. He helped her sit up slightly and brought the mug to her lips. She drank. Slowly at first, then less slowly. She had been without food for a long time. He could tell from the way she drank. Not greedy, exactly. Focused. Like someone who had learned to take what was offered and not waste any of it. When she had gotten down most of the mug, she turned her head away. Not rejection, just done. Like a lamp that had used what fuel it had. He lowered her back down. For a moment she was just still. Breathing, eyes closed. Then she opened her eyes. They were dark, very dark brown. Almost black in the firelight, alert in a way that the rest of her face was not yet. These eyes were awake, even if the body that contained them wasn't quite ready yet. She looked at the ceiling first, then at the walls, then at him, and she said, "Are you one of Vane's men?" Just that. Flat. No fear in it that he could hear. Just the question, like she was asking about the weather. No, Elias said. She studied him for another moment, taking inventory. "Where is my mother?" He did not look away. He had learned, sometime in his 50s, that looking away when someone asked a hard question was a coward's move. "I don't know," he said. "I found you alone. You were near the eastern tree line." Something moved across her face then, fast. Gone before he could name it. She went the other way, Ada said. Quiet, steady. She said she would lead them away and then come back. Elias said nothing. "She always comes back," Ada said. He said nothing still. Because there was nothing to say to that. Because Eleanor Whitfield's letter was folded in his shirt pocket, and it did not sound like a letter written by a woman who expected to come back. Ada closed her eyes again. She slept for 4 hours. He built the fire up and watched it, and thought about the key, and the letter, and the name Vane, and the mark that should not have been on that key. He thought about the storm, which was not getting better. He tried his telegraph. He kept a simple field telegraph that a man from the army had shown him how to use, rigged to a line that ran down toward the valley. The storm had knocked out the line. Nothing came through but noise. They were cut off. He pulled his rocking chair close to the fire and sat in it and did not rock. He was not a rocking man by nature. He kept the chair because Ruth had kept one back in Boulder. She had rocked, constantly, happily, back and forth while she read, while she talked, while she thought. The rhythm of it had been a constant in their house. A sound he had not realized was part of him until it stopped. He had bought this chair 3 years after coming to the mountain. He did not know why. He did not use it the way she had. But he kept it. Some things you keep. Ada woke around midnight, not gradually, suddenly, sitting upright with a gasp that filled the whole room. Elias was beside her before she had fully oriented herself. Not reaching for her, not yet, but close. Within range. You're safe, he said. His voice was calm. He had worked on making it calm. You're in a cabin. I found you in the snow. You're warm now. You're safe. She turned her head and found him in the dark. I know, she said. Just that. No panic. No confusion. She had woken Midnightmare and arrived immediately in the present, which told him something about her. My mother's name is Eleanor Whitfield, Ada said. Like she was establishing facts. Like she needed to say it out loud to keep it real. She was a bookkeeper. For vein mining and freight, in Denver. She worked there for 6 years. You don't have to. She found something in the ledgers, Ada continued. Like he hadn't spoken. Like the words had been waiting behind her teeth and now they were coming out and nothing was going to stop them. Something she wasn't supposed to find. She didn't tell me what at first. She just started coming home late, writing things down, checking her figures twice. 3 times, Elias sat down on the floor near her, not looming over her at her level. When did she tell you? 3 months ago. Ada was looking at the fire. Not at him. At the fire. She said. Mr. Vane had been washing money through his legitimate business for almost 40 years. She said the amounts were. She stopped. She said the amounts were very large. How large? Ada looked at him then. The contents of that vault, she said, represent a great deal of money. In gold and currency alone. And the documents inside are worth more than the gold. He believed her. He did not know why he believed her so completely on such short acquaintance. Maybe it was the way she talked. Not performing, not trying to impress him. Just stating facts. The way you talk when you are too exhausted for anything else. And the truth is the only thing light enough to carry. She started keeping a copy of everything in a safe place, Ada continued. A mine. An old one, up in the mountains. She had found the original claim papers in Vane's files. Sherman Mine, claim 1847. It had been abandoned for 20 years, but someone had been using it. Modifying it, Vane? Yes. Ada pulled the blanket tighter. When they realized what she'd done. When they realized she had been copying documents for 2 years. They sent men to our house in Denver. 3 men. We weren't there. We had left the day before. A pause. Mother had a feeling. She said she always got a feeling when things were about to break. She said it was from years of working with numbers. You can feel when the numbers don't balance. She had gone back to looking at the fire. We drove north. Then, into the mountains. She showed me the mine. We went inside. She went to look at the documents one last time and something tightened in her jaw. I asked her what would happen if they found us. She said that wasn't going to happen. A beat. And then she heard them. On the road? On the road. Horses. She knew the sound. She knew them. Ada's hands tightened in the blanket. We ran. She put me on the mule and took the horse herself, and she told me to ride east into the trees and stay there. She said she would lead them west, toward the pass. She said she would come back, and the key. Ada looked at him sharply. She gave you the bag, he said. Your mother gave you the bag with the key in it. Yes, and the note. Something shifted in Ada's face. Just slightly. She had not known about the note. She had not known he'd read it. My mother wrote you a note, Elias said. It was not a question. I didn't know that. She put it in your coat pocket. In her pocket. He watched her face carefully. She wrote your name, and she said not to take you to the sheriff in Coldwater Ridge. And she said not to trust anyone who works for Vane. Ada absorbed this without moving. She also said, Elias continued, and he kept his voice very level, that she couldn't come back. The fire popped. Sent a spray of sparks up the chimney. Ada did not cry. He had been watching for it, not because he wanted her to, but because he wanted to know what kind of person she was, and you learn things about people in those moments. She did not cry. Her jaw worked once. Her eyes went very still, and then she breathed in once, very slow, through her nose and let it out the same way. I know, she said just those 2 words. I knew when she put me on the mule, Ada said. The way she looked at me. She looked at me the same way she looked at our house when we left Denver. Like she was memorizing it. Elias looked at the floor. She wrote that you were brave, he said. She always said that. A fraction of something in Ada's voice. Not quite a break, not quite. She said it so many times I stopped believing she meant it. I thought she just said it the way mothers say things. A pause. I think she meant it. I think she meant it too, Elias said. Because he had read that letter. And Eleanor Whitfield had not written like a woman saying things for comfort. She had written like a woman stating facts. They sat without speaking for a while. The fire talked for them. The wind outside had gentled slightly. Not gone, not even close to gone, but less violent. Less like something trying to come in. There's something else. Ada said. Elias waited. She knew your name. He went very still. Before we left Denver. Before all of this, Ada was watching him carefully now. He could feel it even without looking directly at her. She said if anything happened to her, I should try to find a man named Elias Stone. She said he lived in the mountains west of Coldwater Ridge. She said he was a carpenter who had been up there 12 years. How did she know about me? Not a question. Not quite, more like a man thinking out loud. I don't know. She found things in the Vane records, information about people. She was very thorough. Ada's voice was careful. She said she had read things that made her believe you could be trusted, that you weren't connected to Vane. Elias thought about that. She also said, Ada added, and there was something almost apologetic in it, that you would understand why, when you found the key. He reached into his shirt pocket, took out the key and set it on the floor between them. The firelight caught the brass surface, the markings on both sides. Ada looked at it, then at him. Do you understand? She said. Not entirely, Elias said. Not yet. He picked the key back up, turned it over. The mark on the backside, the chevron with the crosshatch, 12 years. He had not used that mark in 12 years. He had not told anyone about it. He had not thought about it, not consciously. In a long time, Ruth had known it. Only Ruth. Tell me about the mine, he said. She told him. She talked for a long time. He listened the way he had once listened to blueprints. Fully, without interrupting, letting the whole picture build, before he started asking about the details. Ada was methodical in the way of someone who had grown up watching a methodical woman work. She organized her information. She did not repeat herself. She corrected herself once when a date was wrong, and went back and started that section over without apologizing for it. The mine had been abandoned since the 1850s. Silver, played out in 5 years. Cornelius Vane had purchased the claim in 1861, quietly, through a shell company. He had been modifying it ever since. The rough-hewn tunnel at the entrance was original. But further in, Eleanor had found something else. A vault, not figurative, an actual vault. A room reinforced with timber and iron, with a modern lock on a heavy door. Inside, her mother had found crates and boxes and filing cabinets, organized, labeled, maintained the physical assets, gold bullion in small bars, stamped and dated, paper currency, mostly large bills, bearer bonds, mining certificates, the kind of wealth that does not declare itself on any ledger, the documents, 40 years of transaction records, names, counter-signatures on arrangements that should never have existed. Big names? Elias asked. Very big, Ada said. She didn't tell me all of them. She said the less I knew, the safer I would be. He understood that. Eleanor Whitfield had understood something about danger that most people only understood in theory. She copied what she could, Ada continued, by hand. She had her ledger books and a good memory, and she wrote down everything, the signatures, the dates, the amounts, exactly as they appeared. She said a copied document in her handwriting was worth less than a photograph, but still worth something. Still enough? And the originals? Elias asked. The actual ledger pages? Inside the mine, Ada said. Vane's own records. She left them exactly where they were. She said moving them would alert him sooner. She said only way in was the key. Elias looked at the key in his hand. And that person is you, Ada said. Now, he turned the key over one more time, set it on his knee. Outside, the storm was beginning very slightly to ease, not stop, but ease. The sound of it changed, became less like a wall and more like a river, still moving, still powerful, but with direction now. Going somewhere instead of just pressing everywhere at once. The mark on the key, he said. Yes, who put it there? My mother, Ada said. She carved it herself. From a drawing she found in the vein files. She paused. There was a record, from 1868, a transaction record for a payment made to a man named Dr. Carl Foss of Boulder. The payment was for services rendered in relation to a woman named Ruth Ann Stone. Another pause. Careful, precise. My mother said that when she found that record, she knew it was important. She didn't know yet what it meant, but she copied it with everything else. Ilias said nothing. Ada continued. She found it on the record too. A signature, or a countersignature, like something identifying who had authorized the payment. Ruth's mark, he said. I think so. I think, Ada stopped. Started again. I think my mother understood that if she could find you, and if she could show you that record, you would understand something about your wife's death that you didn't know. The fire had burned down to a deep red glow. Ilias got up and added wood to it. Slowly, not rushing it. He adjusted the logs with the poker until the air caught, and the flames came back up yellow and warm. He stood with his back to Ada for a moment. 12 years. He had believed it was a fever. He had believed it was one of those terrible random things that the mountain and the wilderness and the world threw at people without reason or explanation. He had believed that Ruth had died of something nobody could have prevented. He had believed the doctor, Dr. Carl Foss of Boulder. He turned around. Go back to sleep, he said. His voice was steady. He had made it steady. You need rest. The storm will break in a day or two. We'll talk more when you've slept. Ada looked at him for a moment. She was 16, and she had just spent what might have been the last night of her life, huddled against a pine tree in a blizzard, and she was still looking at him with those clear, measuring eyes. She was right about you, Ada said. My mother, she didn't know me. She knew enough. A pause. She said, you would not run. She said, some men run from things and some men walk toward them. And she said she believed you were the second kind. Elias said nothing. She was usually right, Ada said. About Papal. She lay back down, pulled the blanket up. Her eyes stayed on him for a moment longer, and then they closed. And this time, when they closed, the tension around them was different. Not the tension of someone fighting to stay conscious. The tension of someone choosing to let go. She was asleep in minutes. Elias sat in the rocking chair. He did not rock. He held the key in both hands and looked at the fire. Outside, the wind moved through the pines like something that had forgotten it was angry. The temperature was dropping. He could hear it in the silence under the storm, the particular deep cold that came in after midnight in December. It would be colder still before morning. He thought about Ruth. He thought about a morning in their second year of marriage when she had come home from the market with a broken finger she had gotten caught between two crates, and she had walked in the door and looked at him and said, very calmly, I need you to set this. And he had. And she had not made a sound, not one sound. She had been that kind of woman. He thought about her last weeks, the headaches, the jaundice, the way she had grown quieter and quieter, not from sadness but from the sheer effort of managing what was happening to her body. He had sat with her through all of it. He had held her hand and talked to her and read to her, which was something he was not good at, the reading aloud. But she had wanted it. She had wanted it. And so he had done it. He had thought she had died of something random and cruel. He looked at the key, Dr. Carl Foss of Boulder, payment for services rendered in relation to Ruth Ann Stone. He held the key in his fist, very tight, for a long moment, then he unclenched his hand. Slowly, deliberately, set the key down on the table. He stood up and walked to the window, and looked out at the darkness and the snow, and the deep black and white silence of mountain night after a storm has begun to tire, somewhere out there. Eleanor Whitfield had made herself the bait for men she knew would kill her. She had done it for Ada. She had done it knowing it would work. She had done it knowing she would not come back. And before she did, she had pointed her daughter at the one man she thought might understand. He thought about what kind of woman does that. What kind of woman, in the last days she has, spends part of them thinking about a stranger in the mountains, and a wrong done 12 years ago and a mark on a brass key. A woman, he thought, who understood that the truth matters, even when you won't be alive to see it land. He turned away from the window. Ada was breathing slowly in the firelight, one hand open, palm up, at the edge of the blanket, like someone who had finally stopped holding on to something. He looked at her for a long moment. He was 58 years old. He had come to these mountains to be left alone. He had built this cabin with his own hands to be left alone. He had spent 12 years becoming the kind of man who could survive alone, and had told himself that was enough. He looked at the key on the table. He looked at Ada's open hand. He walked back to the rocking chair and sat down. He would not sleep tonight. That was fine. He had been awake through worse. He would sit with the fire and the silence and the weight of what he now understood. And in the morning, when the storm had passed and Ada had rested and the world had decided what it was going to be, he would make a decision. He already knew what the decision would be. He just needed the night to get there. The fire burned. The storm talked to itself outside, and Elias Stone, 58 years old, alone 12 years, sat in his dead wife's rocking chair with a brass key in his pocket, and something he had not felt in a very long time beginning to move in the place where his grief had lived. Not rage. Not yet. Something older and quieter than rage. Something that felt, if he was honest with himself, and he was always honest with himself, it was one of the things he was most rigorous about, like the moment before a foundation goes down, before anything can be built, the moment when the ground is prepared. He sat with it. He let it be what it was. Outside, the storm was ending. The storm broke on Thursday morning, not gently. Not the way storms are supposed to break, with a gradual lightening, a slow return of color to the sky. This one stopped the way a held breath stops, all at once. Like someone had simply decided. Elias was already awake when it happened. He had been awake for most of the night, sitting, thinking, turning the key over in his hands until the brass was warm from his skin. When the wind died, the silence was so sudden and so complete that it felt like a sound of its own. He stood up, went to the window, pushed aside the oilcloth he used as a curtain. The world outside was white and blinding and absolutely still. Snow had drifted halfway up the south wall of the cabin. The pine trees stood loaded with it, their branches bent low, some of them touching the ground. The sky above was a hard, clean blue, the kind of blue that only comes after violence, the kind that seems almost apologetic, beautiful, completely unreasonably beautiful. And somewhere in it, somewhere in all that white and cold and silence, Eleanor Whitfield. He turned away from the window. Ada was awake, not recently awake. He could tell from the way she was sitting, cross-legged on the floor near the fire, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap, that she had been awake for a while. She had found the sketch pad he kept on the shelf near the door, the one he had bought 3 years ago in a moment of thinking he might take up drawing, and then never touched. She had a charcoal pencil from the same shelf. She was drawing. He watched her for a moment without speaking. She was drawing the cabin interior, the hearth, the rocking chair, the way the firelight fell across the floor in long, warm shapes. She drew quickly and with more confidence than he expected. Not the drawings of someone who had just learned. The drawings of someone who had been doing it a long time. My mother taught me, Ada said, without looking up. He had not made a sound, but she had known he was there. She said if you could draw what you see, you could also see what other people missed. Ada shaded the edge of the hearthstone with a few quick strokes. She used that for her work. She could look at a ledger page. and draw the pattern of the numbers in her head. She said accounting and drawing were the same thing. Both were about finding the shape underneath. Ilias poured 2 cups of coffee, set one on the floor near her. "Eat," he said, and put a plate of cornbread beside the cup. She ate without stopping her drawing. He approved of that. "The storm has broken," he said. "I heard it stop. Roads will be impossible for another day. Maybe 2. He sat down in the rocking chair. Did not rock, but the snow will be manageable on foot. With snowshoes, Ada looked up then. He held her gaze. "The mine," she said. "The mine," he said. She set down the pencil, picked up the coffee, wrapped both hands around it, and looked at him over the rim. "You've already decided," she said, "last night, and you're taking me with you. You've been there before. I haven't. That's practical thinking. I'm a practical man." Ada looked at her coffee for a moment. "Mother would like you," she said. Just as a fact, the way she stated most things. He said nothing to that, because there was too much to say to it, and most of it was none of a 16-year-old girl's business. They left an hour after sunrise. Ilias led. Ada followed in his footprints, which were the right size for the snowshoes he had rigged for her. A pair he had made 3 winters ago from ash wood and rawhide, sized for his own feet, but adaptable enough. He had wrapped her boots in extra wool and oilcloth, had given her his spare coat, which hung to her knees, had tied a rope around her waist, the other end looped to his belt. She had looked at the rope with one eyebrow slightly raised. "Precaution," he said. "You think I'll fall? I think the drifts are deep and unpredictable, and I don't know what's under the snow in some stretches of this terrain. And if you fall, then we both stop." She had thought about that, and then put the rope on without further argument. She was better on snowshoes than he expected. Not natural, she had not done this before, but she learned fast. She watched his gait for the first 100 yards, copied it, adjusted. By the time they reached the tree line, she was moving with him something close to efficiency. They did not talk much. That was fine with Elias. He had spent 12 years with the mountains' version of conversation, which was mostly wind and bird calls and the occasional crack of a tree limb under ice load. He was comfortable with silence. And Ada moved through silence the way she moved through everything else. Like it was information, like she was listening to it. She pointed out landmarks as they went. That rock, she gestured to the left, toward a formation that did look, from a certain angle, like a sleeping animal. "We passed that coming in." My mother pointed it out. "Which direction were you coming from?" "Northwest." We had come up the old freight road from Coldwater Ridge. Mother knew about it from the mine records. He filed that away, the freight road, which meant they had passed through Coldwater Ridge's orbit, even if not through the town itself, which meant someone may have seen them, which meant their path was potentially traceable. He did not say this to Ada, not yet. They walked for 2 hours through a landscape that made no sound at all. The snow absorbed everything. Footsteps, their breath, even the wind when it came was muffled by the weight of all that white. Winter mornings at altitude had their own cruelty. Bright sun, no warmth, the kind of cold that doesn't announce itself until you've already stopped moving long enough to feel it. It looked like a beautiful day. It was not a beautiful day. It was a day that could kill you if you stopped moving for too long. Ada did not stop moving. He respected that about her. The mine entrance was in a hillside. He had passed dozens of times. He knew that now, and it troubled him. Not in a dangerous way, in a carpenter's way. The way it troubles you when you realize you have been looking at a thing wrong, measuring it wrong, misidentifying a structural element that now changes your understanding of the whole. He had seen this hillside 100 times. He had noted the old timber, the rusted rails emerging from the base of it. He had filed it the way he filed all the abandoned mines up here. Dangerous, unstable, not worth investigating. He had been wrong about the unstable part. The timber framing was original, rough, old, silver gray with decades of weather. but behind it, set back inside the entrance so that you would have to step past the timber framing to see it, a door iron. Heavy, modern. Painted a shade of gray that matched, not exactly but closely enough, the weathered timber around it. You had to know to look. You had to get close. Ilias got close. The lock was solid brass, well maintained. No rust in the mechanism, which meant someone had been maintaining it recently. Which meant someone had been here recently. He took out the key. Ada stood just behind his right shoulder, close enough that he could hear her breathing. She was not frightened, or rather, she was frightened and it wasn't stopping her, which was the more important fact. He put the key in the lock. It turned. The door swung inward on hinges that had been recently oiled. Smooth and quiet, which was its own kind of unsettling. Old mine doors do not open quietly. This one had been made to darkness beyond. Cold, compressed, the kind of cold that comes from stone that has not seen sun in decades. He lit his lantern. The tunnel was not what he expected. He had expected rough, unfinished. A mine is a mine, raw rock and timber shoring, and the smell of old dynamite and water seeping through cracks. He had been in abandoned mines before. He knew what they were. This was not that. The first 30 feet were exactly that. Rough stone walls, timber shoring, old but still standing. The iron rails on the floor tarnished but solid. The smell of rock and age. And then, 30 feet in, the tunnel changed. The walls became smoother. Not finished, smooth, not worked stone. But the rough edges had been cleared, the ceiling raised, the floor leveled. The timber shoring became iron bracing, and along the left wall, running all the way into the darkness ahead, a series of iron hooks from which lanterns hung. Cold now, unlit, but the oil in them was not old. Someone had been here within the last few weeks. Ada had gone quiet beside him. She was taking in the transformation the same way he was. He could feel her processing it. "Bigger than I remembered," she said softly. "When were you here?" "2 nights before the storm. Mother brought me in the afternoon." A pause. "It was dark by the time we came out." They moved deeper. The tunnel curved left, then right, then descended at a gentle angle that you would not notice, except for the faint pull in the backs of your calves. Going down, into the mountain, into the dark that his lantern was just barely holding at bay. Ada's hand found the back of his coat. Not grabbing, just touching, just maintaining contact the way you maintain contact with a wall in an unfamiliar room. He didn't comment on it. The vault room opened up without warning. One moment he was in a tunnel, 8 feet wide and 7 feet tall. The next he was standing in a cavern that made him stop walking and just stand. The ceiling was 12 feet up, maybe more. Natural stone, arched like the nave of a church. 2 iron lanterns hung from iron brackets driven into the rock, and when Elias touched his flame to their wicks, the room leaped into view all at once. All of it, crates stacked along the walls. Wooden, iron-banded, stenciled with numbers. A row of metal filing cabinets, 4 of them, standing against the far wall like sentinels. A heavy work table in the center of the room, with a ledger lying open on it, a pen, resting in the spine of it like someone had only just stepped away. Shelving units along the right wall, organized with the kind of precision that tells you whoever organized it thought about being here long-term. And in the corner, a smaller crate, separate from the others. No stencil, no number. Just a piece of white cloth draped over the top of it. Ilias went to the stacked crates first. He used his pocket knife to pry open the top of the nearest one. Inside, packed in sawdust, gold bars, small ones, maybe 4 inches long, stamped with dates and purity markings. He counted 8 in the visible layer alone. He replaced the lid and moved to the next, paper currency, banded, clean, large denominations, the next. More bars, different stamps, the next. Bearer bonds and mining certificates rolled and tied. He stood in the center of the room and turned slowly. 40 years. Cornelius Vane had been building this for 40 years. Moving money through his freight business. Taking a percentage of legitimate transactions. Creating paper trails that led nowhere. and bringing the physical assets here, to a mountain that nobody visited, to a mine that the record said was played out and abandoned. Brilliant. Terrible. Patient, the kind of patience that only comes from never having been afraid of consequences. Ilias walked to the filing cabinets. He pulled the first drawer, inside. Ledger pages copied by hand, organized by year, and then by transaction type. He pulled a handful and held them close to the lantern. Names, transaction amounts, dates, counter-signatures. He recognized 2 of the names in the first dozen pages. Not personally, not men he had met, but men he had heard of. A state senator elected in 1876. A federal circuit judge appointed the year before that, their names appearing not once but repeatedly. Across years, across transaction types, not just money laundering, purchase. These men had been purchased, not once, repeatedly, reliably. Across decades, Vane had not just been hiding money. He had been buying the infrastructure of safety, the people who could make charges disappear, the people who could redirect investigations, the people who could sign off on mining claims and freight licenses and land transactions, ask questions that might be inconvenient. Ilias put the pages back carefully, exactly as he had found them. He turned to look at Ada. She was standing in front of the smaller crate, the one with the white cloth. She had not opened it. She was standing very still, her hands at her sides. "Ada, I know what's in it," she said. "She told me." He walked over and stood beside her. "She left it for you," Ada said. She didn't say that exactly, but she described where she was going to put it, and she said, "A breath. Controlled." She said that when the right person found it, they would know what to do. He lifted the white cloth. Underneath was the crate. He opened it, inside, wrapped carefully in oilcloth. A packet of documents, tied with cord. And on top of the packet, held in place by the cord itself, a sealed letter. Written on the outside in careful, clear handwriting, for Elias Stone. "If he should find this, and if you are not Elias Stone, please do not open this, put it back. It is for him." He picked it up. Ada stepped back 1 step. Not far. Just enough to give him space. He broke the seal. Eleanor Whitfield wrote the way she apparently did everything else. Carefully, without waste. She had dated the letter the night before she went into the storm. She knew, he thought. She had known. She wrote first about Ada. What she liked to eat. That she would claim not to be afraid of things, and should be watched carefully for signs that she was in fact afraid. Because she would never admit it. That she had her grandmother's stubbornness, which was a compliment, even if it didn't always feel like one. That she was cleverer than she let people see, because she had learned early that clever women made people uncomfortable. That she deserved a great deal better than what had happened to her. He read this part slowly. Then Eleanor Whitfield wrote about Cornelius Vane. She wrote about the ledgers, about what she had found after the first year, about the pattern she had identified, the paper trails, the shell companies, the way the legitimate freight business had been designed from its inception as a vehicle for something else. She had been meticulous. She laid it out for him, the way you lay out a set of plans for someone who is going to do the building. She wrote about the names in the files, the senator, the judge, several others. She gave him the cabinet numbers and the page numbers and the specific documents he would need to find. And then she wrote about 1868. She wrote about a transaction record she had found in Vane's personal ledger. A payment made in cash in October of 1868 to a Dr. Carl Foss of Boulder, Colorado. The notation beside it, FR services rendered, stone matter resolved. She had not known what it meant at first. She had copied it with everything else. And then she had begun to understand the context. The other payments in that ledger? The other notations. The pattern of how Vane handled problems that could not be handled through legitimate channels. "I do not know for certain," Eleanor wrote. "I want to be honest with you. I cannot prove what I believe. But what I believe, based on the pattern I have observed across 40 years of his records, is that Dr. Foss was paid to administer a substance to your wife. That the notation, resolved, is Vane's way of recording that an inconvenient witness had been removed, and that your wife, Mr. Stone, did not die of any fever. There is a record of a deposition she made in the spring of 1865 in a matter relating to workers at Vane's Clear Creek operation. She had witnessed something. She had reported it. The deposition was filed but then lost. The matter was dropped, but Vane kept a copy of the deposition in his personal records. He kept a great many things. He was, in his way, meticulous. I found your name through her name. I found your location through the county land records from 1868 when you filed a homestead claim. I have held this information for 4 months, trying to determine what to do with it. And I have decided that if I cannot deliver it to you myself, I will make sure it reaches you another way. I am sorry for what happened to your wife. I am sorry I could not tell you sooner. I am sorry I cannot be there to explain this in person. Please take care of Ada. She is going to be remarkable. If someone will let her. Elias finished reading. He stood very still for a long time. The lanterns burned on either side of him, steady and warm, which felt wrong. Wrong that the light should be warm. Wrong that the room should be calm. Everything inside him was the opposite of calm. But he stood still because that was what he knew how to do. When the thing you are feeling is too large for the room, you hold it inside your body, and you stand still, and you let the size of it be what it is without breaking anything. Ruth, he thought about the doctor. Carl Foss, who had sat in their parlor and said he couldn't explain it, who had held Ruth's hand with professional sympathy and written in his records, fever of unknown origin, who had been paid in cash before she was even gone. 3 weeks. He had sat with her through 3 weeks dying, and he had not known. 12 years he had lived in these mountains, with a story that was wrong. 12 years he had grieved a random act of an indifferent universe. 12 years with the wrong wound. The real one was much older, and much worse. And somehow, and this was the part that he was not ready for, much more possible, to do something about. He folded the letter, put it in breast pocket against his chest, turned around. Ada was standing by the entrance to the tunnel, her arms crossed, her eyes on him. She had been watching his face for the last several minutes, and he knew she had seen things there he had not intended to show. You knew, he said. I knew what she believed. Ada's voice was even. I didn't know what was in that letter specifically. She didn't tell me exactly, but you knew she had found something about Ruth. Yes, he breathed in once. Let it out, she said. It was important, Ada said. She said you would know what to do with it better than anyone, she said. A pause. She said that a man who has been carrying the wrong grief for 12 years deserves to know the truth. Even if the truth is worse. Elias looked at the floor of the vault. Stone worn smooth in some places by foot traffic. Someone had been here regularly, maintaining the space, keeping the lanterns oiled, keeping the records organized. Vane or someone who worked for Vane, which meant someone knew this place, which meant someone might be watching it. He looked up sharply. How many people know this mine exists? He said, Vane. His inner circle. Ada uncrossed her arms. She had seen the same thing in his face. The men who have been using it. Anyone outside Vane's organization? My mother knew. A pause. And now you? And you. Yes. He crossed the room in 5 strides and picked up his lantern. We need to go, he said. They were in the tunnel when he heard it. A sound from outside. Faint. Coming through the mountain's stone the way sounds travel through stone. Distorted and directionless, but unmistakably there. A horse, then another. He stopped walking, put a hand back without looking. Ada stopped immediately. She had heard it too, multiple horses. Walking, not running. The controlled pace of animals being ridden by someone who is trying not to announce themselves. Elias turned off the lantern. Complete darkness. The kind that has weight to it. Ada's hand found his shoulder from behind and stayed there. Light but present. He stood and listened. The horses stopped, just outside. He could not hear voices. The stone and the distance between them, absorbed voices, but he could feel the change. The way silence changes when people are standing in it. He counted to 30. Then he touched Ada's hand. 3 quick taps. He moved forward in the dark, slowly, his hand on the wall to his left. She moved with him, her hand on his shoulder, following his pace exactly. He was not going to the main entrance. He had noticed the secondary passage on the way in. A natural fault in the rock, about halfway back, narrow. A grown man would have to turn sideways. He had noticed it and filed it the way he filed all such things. Automatically, without thinking about it much. Because a man who has spent 12 years in wild terrain files exits the way other men file exits. Instinctively, just in case. He found it in the dark by memory and by the change in the air, which moved differently near the fault. Colder. A thin breath of outside coming through. He put Ada through first. She went without hesitation. He followed, sideways, pack-scraping stone, one shoulder dragging. The passage was tight enough to be uncomfortable, and long enough to be frightening in the dark, but not so long that his nerve broke. On the other side, pale gray light. The passage opened onto the hillside, about 100 yards east of the main entrance. Behind a screen of scrub pine and boulder fall. He would never have found it from outside. It looked like a shadow. A gap between rocks, nothing more. They came out into the cold in the silence. Elias flattened against the rock and looked carefully around the edge of the boulder. At the mine entrance, 3 horses tied to the timber framing. He could see tracks in the snow, 3 sets going in. Not Vane himself. Vane would not come himself, but men who knew what was here, men who had come specifically to check on it. He looked at Ada. She had already assessed the situation. He could see it in the set of her jaw. The controlled steadiness of someone doing arithmetic in their head. "They'll find the letter is missing," she said, very quietly. "Yes. They'll know someone was here. Yes. How long before they come out? 10 minutes. Maybe less." He was already moving, pulling her away from the boulder and into the trees. "Stay close. Don't run. Running in deep snow is how you fall, and if we fall, we—" "I know," Ada said. They moved. 2 hours of careful, deliberate movement through terrain Elias knew in his bones. Through stretches of forest where snow was shallower under the canopy and their tracks were less visible. Doubling back twice, crossing a frozen creek that would not hold their tracks. Ada did not complain, did not slow, did not ask him to stop. At one point, when they were crossing an exposed ridge, and the wind came at them sideways, with everything it had, she simply lowered her head and walked into it like she had been walking into wind her whole life. Maybe she had. They came to the cabin from the north, the long way around. Elias stopped at the tree line and studied it for 5 full minutes before moving. The snow around the cabin was undisturbed. No tracks on the south side, where the drift would hold an impression longest. The chickens were making noise from the outbuilding, which meant they had not been disturbed. The door was exactly as he had left it. He went in first, checked every corner, checked the root cellar, came back out. "Clear," he said. Ada walked in and went straight to the fire, which had burned down but was not completely out. She added wood without being asked. She had learned that in the past 24 hours. Or maybe she had known it before. He bolted the door, stood in the middle of the room and thought, 3 men at the mine. Men who worked for Vane. Men who would now know that someone had been inside. Men who would be asking questions about who had been in that territory. Who lived up here. Whether anyone had seen the Whitfield woman. He had been invisible for 12 years. He was not invisible anymore. He was at the window when he heard the horses. Not the distant sound of them, the way he had heard them at the mine. Close. On his access trail, which was a thing nobody had ever been on in 12 years. Ada looked at him from across the room. He held up one hand, pointed down. She understood immediately. The root cellar. She picked up the satchel, took one step, and stopped. The key. she said. It was on the table. She picked it up and tucked it inside her dress. Then she went to the root cellar door, lifted it, looked back at him once, and went down. He pulled the rug over the door, moved the kitchen table on top of it. Not perfect, but better than nothing. Then he picked up his rifle, 3 riders. Coming slow. They stopped about 60 yards out. The man in the center dismounted first. He was tall, broad through the shoulders. He wore a good coat. Not a working man's coat, not the heavy wool that was practical up here. A coat for a man who is used to having his comfort accommodated. He had the posture of a man who had not been wrong about anything important in a very long time. Behind him, 2 others stayed on their horses. The tall man looked at the cabin for a moment, then he raised his voice. "Mr. Stone," carrying easily through the cold air. "I'm told you've been on the mountain 12 years and never had trouble with a single soul. I'd like to keep it that way." Ilias said nothing. "My name is Pharaoh. I work for a businessman in Denver. I believe you may have found something that belongs to him. Something that found its way to your property. As it were, along with a young woman." Ilias kept his eyes on the 2 men on horses. Both held rifles across their saddles. Not pointing, just present. "We're not here for trouble," Pharaoh continued. "We're here for a conversation. Between reasonable men, a pause. You've been up here long enough to know that everything gets easier when people are reasonable." Ilias moved to the door, not to open it. To put his voice closer to the outside air, "How many men does Cornelius Vane need to have a reasonable conversation?" he said. A silence from outside that told him what he needed to know. He had guessed right. "Mr. Stone," Pharaoh said, and the pleasantness in his voice had acquired an edge. "We know the girl is here. We know she found the mine. What we need to know is—" "The girl's not here," Elias said. Another silence. "She ran in the storm," he said. "Before it broke. I couldn't hold her. 16-year-old girl decides she's leaving, not much a man can do. And the key." "What key?" A long pause. "Mr. Stone." Pharaoh's voice had become something else entirely now. Not pleasant, not threatening. Colder than either. The voice of a man doing arithmetic. "I've known about you for 3 days. Since the Whitfield woman came through this territory. A carpenter from Boulder who walked away from his life 12 years ago. A man who doesn't receive visitors, who doesn't go to town." A pause. "A man who is, therefore, what you might call expendable." Ilias said nothing. "The girl," Pharaoh said. "The key? And we'll leave you to your mountain." Ilias moved back to the window, and then he saw the 4th man. Coming around the south side of the cabin, moving quietly through the drifts, thinking he was unseen. He wasn't. "Tell your man on the south side to stop," Elias said through the window. "Or I'll tell him myself." A beat. Then Pharaoh raised one hand without turning around. The man on the south side stopped. "All right," Pharaoh said. And this time, there was something almost like respect in his voice. The reluctant kind. The kind that doesn't help you any. "We'll do this the other way." They pulled back to the tree line. Ilias watched them go and did not relax. He went to the root cellar door, lifted the table, pulled back the rug. "Ada, I heard," she said from below. "Come up." She climbed out. Her face was composed. Too composed, maybe. The face of someone keeping themselves together by sheer decision. "They won't wait long," Elias said. "No, they'll try again tonight. More men, probably." She looked around the cabin, at the walls, the door, the windows. "This cabin," she said. "You built it, yes. You know every nail, every beam. Every weakness in the walls and the floor, and where the drafts come from in February." He was already moving, already thinking like a carpenter again, which was the thinking he had always done best. "I've been fortifying this building in my head for 12 years, in case. I just didn't know in case of what." Ada pulled her coat tighter. "What do we do?" Elias put the key on the table. Looked at it. Then he looked at Ada. "I need to tell you something," he said. "About your mother, and about a thing she found." Ada went very still. "Not what she wrote in the letter," he said. "You don't need to know that part. Not yet." He chose his words the way he chose lumber. for what they could bear. She found information about someone I knew, someone I lost. She left that information for me deliberately. She wanted me to have it, I know, Ada said. He looked at her. I guessed, she said, from the way you were after you read it. You weren't sad, you were. She searched for the word, oriented. Like someone who has been walking in the wrong direction and suddenly knows which way is north. He thought about that. Yes, he said. That's about right. She held his gaze. Then you know why she did it. Why she put your name in that letter she left with me. Why she pointed me at you specifically. Because she wanted me to have a reason, he said. Yes. To fight. Yes. Ada's voice was quiet. She didn't just need someone to protect me. She needed someone who had something worth fighting for. Something beyond. She gestured at the cabin, at the mountain, at the life he had built here in its careful, solitary smallness. Beyond surviving, Elias looked at the key on the table, at the letter in his breast pocket, against his chest, at the girl standing in his cabin, in her borrowed coat with her mother's steadiness in her eyes. Your mother was a very thorough woman, he said. She was, Ada said. The best I've ever known. He picked up the key, tucked it into his vest pocket. Here's what's going to happen, he said. He spent the afternoon preparing. He worked with the focused quiet of a man who has been building things his whole life and understands that the difference between something that holds and something that fails is in the preparation, not the execution. He moved furniture, reinforced the shutters with extra timber, identified his lines of fire and his lines of retreat, found the things he had put away for emergencies, and confirmed they were where he had left them. Ada did not sit idle. She organized the documents she had memorized from the vault, the ones she had absorbed on their 2 visits. She wrote them down in careful order in the back pages of his sketchpad. Names, amounts, dates, the senator, the judge, the Freight Commission chairman who had been signing off on Vane's manifests for 30 years. She was her mother's daughter. Around 4 in the afternoon, when the winter dark was beginning to come down early the way it did in December, she sat down across from him. Sheriff Mast in Coldwater Ridge, she said. Mother mentioned him. He's Vane's man, yes. She was certain of it. Ada looked at the window, but there was another name, a former deputy. He was removed from his position 3 years ago. Mother said she believed it was because he had refused to do something, Vane asked. Amos Farrell, Elias said. Ada looked at him sharply. I've been up here 12 years, he said. I hear things when I go to town for supplies. Farrell was the honest one. Everyone knew it. And everyone knew why he was removed. Do you know him? Not well. Seen him twice. Would he help? A man who lost his position for refusing Vane, Elias considered it, possibly. If someone gave him a reason, someone with evidence, Ada said, someone with evidence. They looked at each other across the table. If you could get to Coldwater Ridge, Elias said carefully, I could get there. It's 8 miles in deep snow. I grew up in Denver, Ada said. I have walked farther than that in worse conditions. You're 16. I'm Eleanor Whitfield's daughter. A pause. That counts for more than 16 years. He could not argue with that. He pulled a piece of paper from the shelf, wrote on it, a name, a street. What to say? He folded it and gave it to her. She put it in her dress pocket next to the key. Not yet, he said. When the time comes. You'll know when. She nodded. Outside, in the trees, something moved. Probably wind. Maybe not. He picked up his rifle. Get some rest, he told her. A few hours. I'll watch. Ada looked at him. She started to say something, then stopped, then said something different. She chose you, Ada said. Out of everyone she could have tried. She chose you, I know. She wasn't wrong about people, Ada said. Not once in my entire life was she wrong about a person. He had no answer for that. There was no good answer for that. So he just held her gaze for a moment, and then turned back to the window, to the trees, to the particular darkness of a December evening in the mountains, when the cold is the hardest and the sky has not yet committed to its stars. The fire burned. The cabin held, And outside, in the silence, men with Vane's money in their pockets were deciding how to solve a problem that had until 3 days ago not existed for them. He was going to make sure it kept existing for a long time. The dark came all the way down before anything moved. He was at the window when he saw the lights, not lanterns, too small for lanterns. Torches, maybe, or small lamps with the wicks turned low. Moving through the trees, with the careful spacing of men who know what they are doing. More than 3. This time, he counted 6 distinct light sources before he stopped counting. 6, which was more than before. Which meant Pharaoh had gone for reinforcements. Which also meant Pharaoh was no longer interested in a conversation. Elias checked his rifle. Set his spare ammunition within reach. Looked at Ada, who was awake. Of course she was awake. She had been lying still, with her eyes closed in the way of someone thinking very hard about a great many things. Ada, he said. She sat up. Now, he said. She stood in one motion, put on her coat, picked up the satchel with the sketch pad inside. Looked at him once. I'll come back, she said. I know, he said. She went to the root cellar door, lifted it, and then stopped. Elias. He looked at her. She said one more thing, Ada said. About you. She said. A breath. She said that 12 years of living alone teaches a man one of 2 things. Either the world can get along without him, or he's been saving himself up for something. He said nothing. She thought it was the second one, Ada said. She went down. He let the door down quietly behind her. Replaced the rug. Replaced the table. Then he turned to face the window. 6 lights in the trees, moving closer, spreading out in a pattern that meant to surround. He was 58 years old. He had been a carpenter. He had been a husband. He had been a broken man on a mountain for 12 years. And he had thought that was the end of the story. He took a breath, let it out, and raised his rifle. The first shot came through the north window. Not aimed. A warning. The kind of shot that is meant to make a man flinch, meant to remind him of his own fragility, meant to establish who is in control of the situation. Before the situation has fully begun, Elias did not flinch. He had been expecting it. He had positioned himself at the east wall, away from both windows, where the angle made him nearly invisible from outside, and where the double-thick logs would slow anything coming through. He had built this wall himself. He knew what it could take. The shot punched a hole through the shutter and buried itself in the far wall, 3 feet above the floor, aimed at chest height for a standing man, which told him something useful. They did not know exactly where he was. He moved to the window, stayed low, put his eye to the gap in the shutter and counted. 6 lights in the trees, spread in a rough semicircle, 40 yards out. The darkness and the snow made it hard to see bodies clearly, but he could track the lights. He had been tracking them for the past 20 minutes, while Ada went down through the root cellar and out the narrow escape tunnel he had dug 3 years ago, because a man alone in the wilderness thinks about exits the way other men think about doors. He hoped she was clear of the property. He had to assume she was clear. He fired once through the shutter gap, not at anyone. Above them, into the trees. The sound of it in the confined winter air was enormous. A crack that rolled across the valley and came back. Silence from the trees, then Pharaoh's voice. Closer than before, Mr. Stone. Last chance to make this simple. I've heard that before, Elias said through the shutter. You can't hold 6 men alone, haven't tried yet. A pause. The pause of a man recalculating. The girl, Pharaoh said. If she's gone, we'll find her. The snow holds tracks for days up here. You know that better than I do. Elias said nothing because Ada had not gone in the snow. She had gone through the tunnel, which came up inside the outbuilding, inside the structure's footprint, where the overhang kept the ground clear enough. He had built that overhang for exactly this reason. Well, not exactly this reason, but close enough. She's 16 years old, Pharaoh said. 8 miles to town, in December. You think that ends well for her, I think, Elias said. That you've never met a woman like her mother. Another pause. Then the second shot came, through the south shutter this time. Meant to bracket him. Meant to make him feel surrounded. He was surrounded. That was simply a fact. But facts in Elias Stone's experience were not the same thing as conclusions. He held the cabin for 2 hours. 2 hours of controlled, deliberate engagement. Not trying to win. Not trying to drive them off. Trying to keep them occupied. Trying to keep them focused on the cabin, and on him and not on a 16-year-old girl, making her way through the dark toward a town 8 miles east. He fired economically. 1 shot every 10-15 minutes. Enough to remind them he was there. Enough to make them cautious. Cautious men move slowly. Slowly was what he needed. The cold was working for him too. Men standing still in December mountain air, in the dark, waiting for something to happen, they get cold. Cold men make worse decisions. Cold men want it over. Cold men start to rush. He heard them arguing once, brief. Sharp. Pharaoh's voice cutting through, restoring order. But there had been disagreement. That was something. They tried the south side again around the 3rd hour. 2 men moving together, using the shadow of the woodpile for cover, coming at the cabin from a low angle. Elias had anticipated this. He had a firing position, prepared for exactly this approach. A gap between 2 logs he had identified when he built the south wall, and had quietly widened over the years to serve exactly this theoretical purpose. He put a shot in the snow 10 feet in front of them. They stopped. Next one isn't in the snow, he said through the wall. They retreated. He did not feel triumphant. He felt focused, which was different. Triumph was for afterward. If there was an afterward, don't be dramatic about it, he told himself, and then he felt it. A burning in his left shoulder that started as warmth and became, very quickly, something else. He looked down, a dark spot on his shirt, growing. He had not heard the shot that caused it. The fire from multiple directions had blurred together in his attention, and he had missed the moment when one of them found a better angle. The wound was in the back of the shoulder, which meant the bullet had come through the north wall at a lower point than he'd expected, through a gap in the chinking he had noticed last spring, and meant to address, and had not gotten around to, an inch lower, and it would have been the lung. He pressed his right hand against it, kept moving, because stopping was not currently an option. The pain was significant. He filed it under significant and kept working. This was the thing about being 58. You had been in enough situations, not this specific situation. Nothing quite like this specific situation. But situations, to know that the body's commentary on what is happening to it is not always relevant to the question of what needs to happen next. What needed to happen next was, keep them here, so he kept them here. The 4th hour was the hardest. The shoulder was bleeding more than he wanted it to. He had packed it with cloth from his shirt, wrapped his coat around himself to apply pressure, and kept moving. But blood loss was blood loss. The world was beginning to acquire a slight unreality at the edges, the way it does when your body is quietly making adjustments you would not have authorized. He was at the east window when he heard it. Not from outside the cabin. Not from the trees. From the direction of the town, voices. Carrying on the clear, cold air, which carried sound a long way, when the temperature was right. Multiple voices, and, underneath them, something rhythmic and collective, the sound of many people moving together through snow. He looked through the east window light, not the small, controlled light of men trying not to be seen. Light like torches, like lanterns, like a large number of people who were not trying to hide at all. Coming from the east, coming from the direction of Coldwater Ridge, 8 miles, she had done it in 4 hours. Of course she had. Pharaoh heard it too. Elias could hear the change in the sounds from the trees, the shifting of bodies, the low urgent exchange of voices, the specific spreading confusion of men whose plan has just acquired a problem. Hold, Pharaoh said, loud enough to reach his men. Too loud. The the voice of a man who was managing stuff that was getting away from him. The lights from the east kept coming. Elias counted them as best he could through the window. Not dozens, not a mob, but enough. 20. Maybe 25 people moving together with the careful purposefulness of people who had made a decision and were acting on it before they could change their minds. In the lead, a lantern held high, and beside the lantern, small, wearing a coat that was too large for her, walking like she had been walking her whole life toward exactly this point. Ada, and beside Ada, a man Elias recognized from 2 brief meetings in 12 years. Stocky, gray at the temples. The walk of a man who had once worn a badge and had not quite forgotten how Amos Farrell. Elias pressed his hand harder against his shoulder and breathed. What happened next was not a battle. That was important to understand afterward. When people in Coldwater Ridge told the story, it was told sometimes as a battle, a confrontation, a standoff with guns and fire, and the drama of good against evil in the mountain dark. It was not that. It was something quieter, and in some ways more powerful. Pharaoh's men held their positions for approximately 4 minutes after the townspeople arrived. You could see them calculating. 6 armed men against 25, which included the school teacher and the blacksmith, and 3 women who had come, because Amos Farrell on their doors and said knocked on their come, and they had come. The arithmetic was not complicated. One by one, the lights in the trees stopped moving. Then, one by one, they came out. Farrell was last. He walked out of the tree line with his rifle held loosely at his side, barrel down, and he looked at the crowd of people from Coldwater Ridge standing in the snow, in front of a bullet-riddled cabin on a mountain. And he looked at Amos Farrell standing among them, with a deputy's star pinned to his coat. Elias learned later that Farrell had kept the star in a drawer for 3 years and put it on that evening without being asked. And he did the calculation. He set the rifle down in the snow. His men did the same. And that was that, except that it wasn't, because the cabin door opened, and Elias Stone came out. He had not intended to be dramatic about it. He had intended to walk out and give Farrell the letter and sit down somewhere, because the shoulder was making the world do things he did not appreciate. That had been the plan. But Ada saw him and the expression on her face, not the composed, controlled face she had been showing him for 2 days, but the actual face underneath it, the one that was 16 years old and had been very frightened for a very long time. That expression changed the plan. She crossed the distance between them at a run. She did not crash into him. She was not careless with his injury. Somehow she knew about the shoulder without being told. She stopped just in front of him and put one hand carefully on his good side and looked at his face and said, "You're bleeding." "Noticed that," he said. "How bad?" "Bad enough. You should sit down. I'm going to." "Now, in a minute, because first there was something to do." He reached into his breast pocket, his right hand, careful, because his left was not cooperating well. He took out Eleanor Whitfield's letter. He looked at it for a moment. He had carried it against his chest for the better part of a day. It was warm from his body. The paper had softened slightly at the fold lines, the way paper does when it has been close to a living person for a while. He looked up. The crowd from Coldwater Ridge was standing in a rough semicircle in the snow. 23 people, he counted later. Some of them he had seen before, in town, at the supply store. Some he did not recognize. All of them were looking at him. Farrow's men were kneeling in the snow to one side. Farrell's people standing over them. The mountain was behind everything. Silent. Enormous. Indifferent to all of it in the way mountains are indifferent, which is not the same as uncaring. Just patient. Elias cleared his throat. It had been 12 years since he had spoken to a group of people. He was not sure he could do this. He was not sure his voice would carry. He was not sure he would not simply stop midway through and be unable to continue. He started anyway. "My name is Elias Stone," he said. "I've been on this mountain since 1868. I came up here after my wife died. I didn't come back down because I didn't have a reason to." His voice was rough. Rougher than he'd expected, but it carried. "3 days ago, I found a girl in the snow. She was dying, and she was carrying a bag that her mother had packed for her. And in that bag was a letter." He held up Eleanor's letter. This letter was written by Eleanor Whitfield of Denver, Colorado, a bookkeeper, a woman who spent 2 years gathering evidence of crimes committed by a man named Cornelius Vane over the past 40 years. He paused. Some of those crimes involved the purchase of public officials. Some involved the suppression of evidence in legal proceedings, and at least one involved the murder of a witness. The silence was total. Even the wind had gone quiet, or he had stopped hearing it. Mrs. Whitfield gave this letter to me because she believed I had a particular interest in that last item. He did not look at Ada. He could not look at Ada right now. She was correct. He opened the letter. He read it. Not all of it. The parts about Ada he kept. Those were not for the mountain air. Those were for later, for a private place, for a conversation that had not happened yet and needed to happen with only 2 of them present. But the parts about Vane, about the records, about the transaction from 1868, and the name of the man who had been paid, and the notation in the ledger that said resolved. He read those parts. His voice did not shake. He was proud of that. Later, when he thought about it, he would decide that the steadiness came from Ruth. From thinking about Ruth. From the fact that she had been steady through everything, through headaches and jaundice, and 3 weeks of dying. And if she could be steady through that, then he could be steady through reading a letter out loud to 23 people on a December mountainside, with a bullet wound in his shoulder. He owed her, at least that. When he finished, he folded the letter, put it back in his breast pocket, looked up. The school teacher was the first one to speak. A woman named Mrs. Hartwell, who he did not know by name but recognized by face, because he had seen her twice at the supply store, and she had the look of a person who notices things. "The mine," she said. "Sherman Mine, we know it. The evidence is there," Elias said. "All of it. Documents going back 40 years. You'll need someone to go through it properly. I know people in Denver." Farrell said, "Federal men, not connected to Vane, then call them." Farrell nodded. The kind of nod that means I've been waiting 3 years to do exactly this. "Vane himself," someone said from the back of the crowd. "Where is he, Denver?" Ada said. She had been quiet through all of it, standing just to his right. Now she spoke clearly, with the same measured precision she had used for everything else. "He rarely leaves Denver in winter. He'll know something has gone wrong by morning. He has a particular set of men he uses for problems at this stage." "Who else?" Sheriff Mast knew about the mine. Ada met Farrell's eyes. At minimum, Farrell looked at Mast, who was standing at the edge of the crowd. Mast had arrived with the townspeople. Had been, Elias would learn later, one of the people Ada had spoken to in Coldwater Ridge. In the moment when she had understood that the way to break something is to find the crack that is already there. Mast looked at the ground, then at Farrell. Then back at the ground. "I'll make a statement," Mast said. Quiet, but loud enough, full statement. "Everything I know," which was in the end quite a lot. They brought a wagon for Elias. He objected. He was overruled by Ada, primarily, who simply took his good arm and walked him toward the wagon with the calm inevitability of someone who has decided that a thing is going to happen and is not interested in discussion. "I can walk," he said. "Yes," she said, "and I can watch you fall over in the snow." "I'd rather not." He got in the wagon. The ride to Coldwater Ridge took 2 hours on roads that were still rough from the storm. He sat in the wagon bed with his back against the side rail and his shoulder packed with cloth, and Ada sitting across from him, not talking, just present. The crowd walked behind and ahead of them, lanterns making the whole procession look in the mountain dark, like something from a painting. Not a triumphant painting, not a war painting. Something quieter, the painting of people doing a thing that needed doing, because it needed doing. Because they had been waiting for someone to start. Elias looked at Ada. She was looking at the mountain receding behind them, at the dark bulk of it against the darker sky. He did not know what she was looking at and exactly what part of it. Whether she was thinking about the mine, or about her mother, or about the past 3 days, or about something else entirely, she would have liked this. Ada said he did not ask what she meant. He knew. She liked when things came together, Ada continued, when the pieces fit. She said good accounting was like that. You build the picture one entry at a time, and then at some point it becomes the whole picture. And either the numbers balance or they don't. Do they balance? Elias said. Ada thought about that for a long time. Not yet, she said. But close. The doctor in Coldwater Ridge was named Greer. He was younger than Elias expected, and more competent than the situation probably deserved. He cleaned the wound, which had gone through the meat of the shoulder, without hitting, bone, or anything that would cause lasting trouble, though there would be some. He stitched it. He wrapped it. He gave instructions in a brisk, efficient manner, and then told Elias to sleep. Elias did not sleep. He lay in the small room above the doctor's office and looked at the ceiling and listened to the sounds of a town that was awake past midnight. There were voices downstairs. Farrell's voice, mostly, and Ada's, and other voices he did not recognize. The sound of things being organized, of decisions being made and written down and committed to. The sound of something being set in motion. He reached into his breast pocket and took out Eleanor's letter. Read it one more time in the dim light from the window. The parts about Ada. The parts he had not read aloud. She will not cry in front of you. Do not mistake that for not needing help. He folded it, put it away. He thought about Ruth, about the specific quality of her presence, the way she had occupied a room. He had been thinking about her differently since reading Eleanor's letter, and the different way was not worse. It was fuller. It was the way you think about something when you have all the information instead of a version of the missing crucial element. She had seen something she should not have. She should not have seen. She had reported it the way Ruth would report it, directly, without calculation, because it was the right thing to do. She had gone to a deposition and told the truth and not known until it was too late that the truth had been noticed. She had been brave. He had always known she was brave. But he had not known about that specific bravery, and it mattered. It changed something. Not the grief. The grief did not change, but the shape of it. He had been carrying the grief of a man who had lost his wife to something random and meaningless. Now he was carrying the grief of a man who had lost his wife because she did the right thing, because she would not look the other way. That grief was harder and lighter, both at once, which he had not expected. He lay there with it until the light outside the window began to change. Ada knocked at 6 in the morning. She came in without waiting for an answer, which he noted without surprise. She was carrying 2 cups of coffee and a plate of biscuits that someone in the town had made. She set them on the small table beside his bed and sat down in the chair across from it. She looked exhausted. The composed face had finally cracked a little at the edges. The eyes were the eyes of someone who had not slept, but she had not broken. He was not going to say that to her, but he was thinking it. Farrell has sent 2 men to Denver, she said, by train. They'll reach his contacts by tomorrow evening. Those men will file the necessary papers and coordinate a marshal's visit to Vane's offices. She wrapped both hands around her coffee. Farrell and his men are in the town's holding facility. They have no authority to detain anyone long-term here, but Farrell has enough to hold them temporarily while the larger process begins. Vane himself will know something has gone wrong very soon, but the documents are in the mine. He cannot remove them without federal oversight now. Farrell has sent a man up there too, to hold the entrance. A pause. And the letter. Your testimony. Mine. She met his eyes. It will be enough. He believed her. Your shoulder, she said. Doctor says it'll heal He told me you'll have reduced mobility in cold weather. Already have reduced mobility in cold weather. 12 years of it, she almost smiled. Still didn't quite make it. But closer than yesterday. He looked at her. Ada. He said it the way you say something when what follows it matters. Not loudly, just wait. Just with weight. She looked at him. Your mother wrote about you, he said. In the letter, she went very still. Not the parts I read last night. The first part, he paused. She wrote about what you like to eat. She wrote about your drawing. She wrote that you have your grandmother's stubbornness. Another pause. She wrote that you are going to be remarkable. If someone will let you. Ada's jaw worked once. She said exactly that? Ada said, exactly that. He watched her absorb it. He watched the thing that was happening in her face, the private, internal rearrangement of a person receiving something they did not know they were starving for. She never said it to me, Ada said. Quiet. Not accusatory. Just the fact of it. Maybe she thought you knew, maybe. A breath. Or maybe she thought it would embarrass me, would it have? A pause that was almost a smile. Completely, Ada said. The days that followed moved quickly and slowly at the same time. The marshal arrived from Denver on the second day, having ridden hard after receiving Farrell's telegram. He needed statements. He needed the key. He needed to be taken to the mine, which Elias did, along with Farrell and 2 deputies, while Ada stayed in town and continued organizing the document evidence she had memorized from the vault into a format the marshal could use. She had a gift for it. The marshal noted this, somewhat reluctantly, on the second day of working with her. He noted it again on the third, less reluctantly. By the 5th day, he was consulting her about the structure of the evidence before making his own decisions. She was 16 years old. She was the daughter of a bookkeeper, and she was calmly, systematically dismantling 40 years of a criminal enterprise around a federal marshal's conference table in a small room, above a general store in Coldwater Ridge. Elias watched her do it from across the table and said nothing. Because there was nothing to say that the watching didn't say better. Cornelius Vane was taken into federal custody on the 8th day. Not in Denver. He had been trying to leave Denver when the marshals arrived, which told them something about what he already knew and when he had known it. He passed through Coldwater Ridge on the way, which Elias heard about secondhand, because he did not go to watch. He had no particular need to see the man. He had already seen what the man had done, and the man had already, in the way that actually mattered, been defeated. Not by guns, not by violence. By a woman who spent that 2 years copying documents. By candlelight in a Denver office while her employer ate dinner in the next room. By a girl who walked 8 miles through a December night because someone needed her to. By a letter that had been written for a man on a mountain, and had found him. Sheriff Mast's full statement was submitted on the 7th day. It was detailed and specific, and covered 23 years of cooperation with Vane's operation. The statement of a man who had been making a particular compromise for so long that he had almost forgotten it was a compromise, and who had been looking, without quite admitting it to himself, for an exit. Ada had given him the exit. She had knocked on his door that night and told him, clearly, and without drama, what was about to happen and what his options were. She had told him that the evidence was enough to bury him, and she had told him that a truthful account of everything he knew might constitute a different kind of future. He had made the right choice. Elias did not particularly respect him for it, a man who makes the right choice, because it is the most expedient choice, has not exactly demonstrated character. But it was the right choice, and it served the process, and that was, in the end, what mattered. On the 11th day, the question of what happened next became unavoidable. Elias had been aware of it for several days. It had been sitting in the corner of every room he walked into, patient and large, waiting for him to turn around and address it directly. Ada had family. Technically, an aunt in Kansas City, her mother's sister. The marshal had written, The aunt had responded within 4 days. Her response was also brief. Regret. Unable to provide suitable accommodation. Recommends state provision. 2 words. State provision. Elias had been given this information by Farrell on the evening of the 10th day. In the quiet way Farrell had of delivering things that needed to be delivered. He had sat with it overnight. On the morning of the 11th day, he went and found Ada. She was in the room above the general store, at the table, going through a final set of documents, making sure everything was in order, because that was the kind of person she was. She looked up when he came in. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. His shoulder ached in the particular way it was going to ache for the rest of his life, in cold weather, which was fine. He had carried worse things. He put his hands on the table. "You're on," he said. "I know," Ada said. "She's not coming. I knew before the letter arrived. No bitterness in it. Just the fact. She has her own difficulties. She always has. What do you know about state provision?" Ada's expression did not change. "I know what it is, and I would prefer not to experience it," he nodded. He had expected that. "I'm going to go back up the mountain," he said, "when the shoulder allows. Probably another week." She looked at him steadily. "I'm going to rebuild," he said. "The cabin took some damage, needs work. I've been thinking about a larger structure. A second room, maybe?" He paused. "Better light on the east side. Better access to the creek." Ada said nothing. "There's a school in Coldwater Ridge," he said. 8 miles. Difficult in winter. Manageable in spring and fall. He looked at the table. A man with a cart could make it reasonable year-round. Elias, Ada said. "I'm not finished." She waited. "I have money," he said. "Not a great deal. But the reward that the federal marshal mentioned, for information leading to the Vane arrest, that'll be enough for the building materials. And I can work. I haven't stopped being able to work." He looked up. "I am not a young man," he said. "I live alone on a mountain. I have 4 chickens, one of which has not laid an egg in 5 months, and I keep anyway, for reasons I have not fully examined." Ada's expression had shifted. Something in it that he could not name. Something that was not the composed, controlled face and not the frightened face, and not any face he had seen from her in the past 11 days. Something new. "But," he said, "your mother chose to point you at me. She chose me. Out of everyone she could have tried. And your mother, by all accounts, was never wrong about people," Ada said. Very quietly. "Was never wrong about people," he agreed. He held her gaze. "I'm asking," he said. "Not telling. Asking. Because Farrell tells me you'll have your own legal standing soon enough, and you're old enough to know your own mind, and what I want matters considerably less than what you want." Ada looked down at the table, at the documents spread across it. The evidence her mother had built, piece by piece, entry by entry, over 2 years of quiet, determined, dangerous work. Then she looked up. "The cabin," she said. "The second room." "Yes, east-facing windows, that was my plan, and the school in town." 8 miles is manageable," he said. "With a cart." She considered this for a long moment. She considered it the way she considered everything, thoroughly. Without performance, taking it apart in her mind and examining the pieces. "The chicken," she said. "The one that doesn't lay Spite. You named her Spite. She earned it." The corner of Ada's mouth moved. Just slightly, more than before, getting closer. "Yes," she said just that one word. But the way she said it, like it was the easiest word she had ever said. Like it had been waiting in her chest for 11 days, and she had just opened the door and let it out. "Yes," she said again, quietly. "I would like that." The legal process took 4 months. Elias did not know, going in, how much there was to a legal process. He had not been involved in one before. He had built things and fixed things, and occasionally argued with difficult clients, but he had never sat in a courthouse or signed documents in triplicate, or answered questions from men in suits about his income and his property and his manner of living. He answered all of it, every question, every form. Every home visit from the county official who came up the mountain in March, when the snow was softening, and walked around the rebuilt cabin. With a clipboard and a skeptical expression, the cabin was not rebuilt yet, exactly. It was in process. The original structure was repaired and functional. The second room was framed, roofed, and partially walled. Elias had been working on it every day his shoulder would allow, which was more days than the doctor in Coldwater Ridge would have liked. The county official walked through it, looked at the framing, looked at the east wall where the windows would go. "You build this yourself," the official said. "I'm a carpenter. Was a carpenter, am." Elias said there's no was about it. A man who can build a thing can always build a thing. The knowing doesn't leave. The official wrote something on his clipboard. Ada, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed and her expression carefully neutral, caught Elias's eye. He gave her a look that meant, "Stop making that face." She gave him a look that meant, "I'm not making any face." He gave her a look that meant, "You know exactly what face you're making." She looked at the ceiling. The official, oblivious to all of this, made a final note and said the report would be filed within 2 weeks. The hearing was in May, a Tuesday. Clear sky. The kind of spring morning that the mountains produce in May, with a generosity that almost makes you forgive them for December. Elias wore his only good coat. Ada wore a dress that Mrs. Hartwell, the schoolteacher, had helped her find. It was blue, a shade of blue that made her look, Elias thought, like exactly who she was. A serious person who also happened to be 16 years old, and who had, in the past 5 months, started occasionally laughing at things, which was the best development of the entire period. Not always, not carelessly, but sometimes, when something struck her as genuinely absurd, she would laugh. And when she laughed, it changed the whole room. The judge was a circuit judge from the next county over, a woman which Elias had not expected, and Ada had seemed to find quietly satisfying. Her name was Judge Annabelle Finch. She had read the file. She had read it thoroughly. You could see it in the way she looked at both of them, with the attention of someone who has assembled a picture in advance and is now checking it against the reality. She asked Ada several questions, clear, direct questions that did not talk down to her. Ada answered them the same way. At the end, Judge Finch looked at Elias. "Mr. Stone," she said, "you are 59 years old. You live in a cabin at altitude, in a location that is by your own report, 8 miles from the nearest town, and 40 miles from the nearest proper medical facility." "Yes," Elias said. "You have no prior experience raising children. No, you have been living as a solitary individual for 12 years. Yes, and you are asking this court to grant you guardianship of a 16-year-old girl, whose circumstances are, to put it plainly, extraordinary." "Yes," Elias said. "I am." Judge Finch looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Ada. "Ada," she said, "in your own words, why him?" Ada was quiet for a moment, not because she didn't know the answer. Elias could tell she had known the answer for a long time. She was deciding how much of it to give. "My mother chose him," Ada said. "She researched him carefully. She did not do things carelessly, and she chose him." A pause. "When he found me, I was dying in the snow. He didn't ask me any questions first. He just picked me up and carried me home." Another pause. "Later, when he found out what I knew and what it might cost him, he didn't ask me to leave. He made coffee, and then he started thinking about what to do next." Judge Finch said nothing. "He reads at night," Ada continued. "He argues with the chickens sometimes. He's teaching me to use a spoke shave, and I'm terrible at it, but he hasn't told me to stop." She looked at Elias for a moment, then back at the judge. "He built a room for me before I had agreed to come. He built it on faith, which is not what I would have expected from a practical man. But there it is." The courtroom was very quiet. "He said he didn't know how to raise a child," Ada said, "which I respect. Because my mother was right about people, and the people she was most right about were the ones who were honest about what they didn't know." Judge Finch looked down at her papers, made a note. "Looked up, Mr. Stone," she said. "The court finds you a suitable guardian for Ada Whitfield. A 6-month review will be conducted, after which the court will consider formalization." She held his gaze. "Don't make me regret this." "No, ma'am." Elias said. The gavel came down. They walked out into the May morning together. The street of Coldwater Ridge was dusty and bright. The mountains were visible at the end of it, the high peaks still white, the lower slopes green with the start of things growing again. Ada stood on the step beside him and looked at the mountains. Elias stood beside her and looked at them too. "Home, Ada," said just the one word, just the way she said it. Like she had been waiting for a word to mean that again, and had decided this one would do. "Home," he agreed. 2 years passed, the way years pass when they contain living rather than just surviving. Full, uneven, surprising in places, hard in other places, real in all of them. The cabin was finished by the following spring. The second room had east-facing windows, as planned, and Ada had put a desk under them where she studied in the mornings when the light was good. She was working through a set of law books that Judge Finch, who had taken an interest, had sent up from Denver. Not because anyone told her to, because she had decided she wanted to understand the system that had failed her mother so that she could understand how to use it better. She had her mother's thoroughness. She had her grandmother's stubbornness. She was, as Eleanor Whitfield had written, remarkable. Elias taught her woodworking. She was not naturally gifted with the tools. Her hands were a bookkeeper's hands. Precise but not physical. But she worked at it with the same focused determination. She worked at everything, and by the second winter she was building things that held together and were correctly measured and occasionally beautiful. She went to the school in Coldwater Ridge 3 days a week when the weather allowed. On the days she could not go, Mrs. Hartwell sent Lesson up with whoever was heading that direction, which was a generosity Elias did not forget. The chickens had expanded to 7. Spite had finally laid an egg. 1. It had produced a small ceremony involving cornbread and coffee, and Ada raising her mug in a solemn toast to the rehabilitation of difficult personalities. Elias had laughed. Properly laughed. The kind of laugh that comes from the chest and surprises you. He had not made that sound in a long time before Ada, and now he made it sometimes, which was a thing he had not expected and was not entirely sure what to do with and had decided to simply allow. Farrell had been reinstated as deputy. There was talk of an election for sheriff. He had not decided yet whether to run. He came up the mountain for dinner occasionally, which Ada had decided was a thing that happened now. She cooked. She was methodical about it, the way she was methodical about everything, and the results were specific and reliable, and once in a while extraordinary. Cornelius Vane was convicted in federal court 8 months after his arrest. The trial was long and complicated, and covered by newspapers in 4 cities. The sentence was hard labor for the remainder of his natural life, which, given his age and disposition, would likely not be long. The network he had built over 40 years was dismantled piece by piece. The shell companies dissolved. The purchased officials investigated. Several of them tried. It was slow. It was imperfect. The law is always slow and imperfect, and the damage done over 40 years cannot be undone in 8 months. But it was happening. Eleanor Whitfield was formally credited, in the federal filing, as the primary source of evidence in the case. Her name was in the official record. Permanently. That mattered to Ada in a way she did not talk about often, but that Elias understood from the way her face changed when she mentioned it. Her mother's name was in the record. She had done what she set out to do. On a September evening in 1882, Elias stood in the workshop behind the cabin. The workshop was his particular project from the past year. A small structure, separate from the main cabin, with good windows on the north and west sides and enough space for a proper bench, and the tools he had slowly, over 2 years, reacquired. He was building furniture again, small pieces at first, a chair, a shelf, a box, then larger ones. He had taken on 2 commissions from people in Coldwater Ridge, which was more social integration than he had intended, but which Ada had pointed out correctly was a reasonable development. He was working on a jewelry box, cherry wood, the grain beautiful in the lamplight. He was taking his time with it. He had always taken his time with things that mattered. Ada appeared in the doorway. She was taller than when he had found her. He had been watching this happen for 2 years, and it still occasionally surprised him. She had her mother's dark hair and her own way of standing, which was the way of someone who is comfortable being exactly where they are. "Farrell is coming for dinner Saturday," she said. "You told me. I told you to. You forgot by Wednesday." He had forgotten by Wednesday. This was an established pattern. "There's a letter," Ada said. She held it out. He took it, looked at the return address. "Denver, Judge Finch's office." "The Review," he said. "The Review?" Ada leaned against the doorframe. "She sent it to me directly. I've already read it." And Ada's mouth did something. The thing it had been doing more often in the past year, which was arrive at a smile before the rest of her face knew it was going there. "And," she said, "it would appear that a 59-year-old carpenter on a Colorado mountain, who argues with his chickens and forgets things by Wednesday, is, according to Judge Finch and the county officials and Mrs. Hartwell and Amos Farrell, a suitable guardian." He set down the spokeshave. "The word she used," Ada continued, "was exemplary, which I found." A pause. "I found that I needed to sit down for a moment." When I read it, he looked at her. She was standing in the doorway of the workshop, with the September evening light behind her, and 2 years of living on her face that had not been there when he first saw her, and her mother's steadiness in her eyes. She was not 16 anymore. She was 18. She was becoming the person Eleanor Whitfield had seen coming. "She wants to know," Ada said, "whether you'd like to proceed with formalization." He looked at the jewelry box on the bench, at the piece of paper he had set aside the week before, with the words he had been planning to have engraved on the inside of the lid. He had not told Ada about that part yet. "Yes," he said. "Tell her yes." Ada nodded. She started to turn Ada. She turned back. He picked up the paper, handed it to her. She read it. Her face did several in quick succession. He watched all of them. He had gotten good in 2 years at reading the faces that she thought she was keeping composed. She looked up. "Ruth," she said, reading the first name on the paper. "Yes, and then Ada," he said, "below it. Not instead of. Below." She looked at the paper for a long time. "She would have been glad," Ada said, very quietly, "my mother. She would have wanted her to be remembered." "I know," Elias said. "That's why." Ada folded the paper carefully, held it. The evening light came through the workshop windows at a long angle, the way September evening light does when it has decided to be generous. It fell across the workbench and the cherry wood and the tools he had relearned to use, and the man who had, in his 58th year, picked up a life he had set down at 46, and found that his hands still knew how. "Saturday," Ada said. "Farrell. Dinner. I'll remember." "You won't." "Probably not," he admitted. "Remind me Friday." The thing happened in the corner of her eyes, the thing that had been getting closer for 2 years. It arrived. She smiled, not the almost smile, not the corner of the mouth approximation, the real one. The whole thing. It did what he had suspected it would do to a room. It changed it completely. "Good night, Elias," she said. "Good night, Ada," he said. She went back into the cabin. He listened to her footsteps on the floor he had built, moving toward the room with the east-facing windows, where the light was good in the mornings, and the desk was exactly the right height, and a set of law books waited in the patient way that important things wait. He turned back to the jewelry box, picked up the spokeshave. Outside, the September darkness was coming in over the mountains. The high peaks had already lost their light. The lower slopes were still warm with it, that deep amber of a day that is ending well. He thought about Ruth. He thought about her the way he thought about her now, which was differently from before. Before, it had been the grief of loss. Now it was that, still, and always would be that. But it was also something else. The grief of someone who finally knows the whole story, who can place the loss in its true context, who understands now what it cost her and what it meant. He thought about what kind of woman does that. He already knew. He had been watching one for 2 years. He picked up his tools. He had a box to finish. The lid needed the names. Both of them. Side by side, not instead of. Together, the way things that matter go together. Not replacing each other, not in competition. Just present, just real.